let's do this. Let's pause for a minute and take some questions from the folks watching today. We've got a couple that are queued up right now. We've heard about microservices and software architecture. Can you explain what exactly that is and why it's important?
Oh,
Big question.
I'm going to try really hard not to be excited about this, but it's one of my favorite things. It's really funny because back in those days I was talking about when I was 11, like when you wrote a piece of software, you built the software, the UI, right. The logic inside of it, the way that you stored the data, all of that was just one thing. It was notepad.exe that you would just give them this file and they run it and it does its thing. And it's like top down programmatically, do this until I tell you to stop. Right. And, along the way around college time, I learned about object-oriented development. It's like, oh my God, it's a game changer. I don't understand what they're talking about, but what does this mean? And every few years, these kind of things seem to happen. So after we got out of the programmatic period, we got into what they call the end-tier development. So this is like, this really kind of comes along with the birth of the web where, you have a user interface that its job is to just be dumb and present information to the user and ask them how to interact with it. Your UI is a completely separate program from your logic layer or your services layer, which we call the middle tier, which is, okay, I need to think, I got all these numbers, somebody uploaded them from an Excel spreadsheet. I need to analyze it and add them all up. So that's my service that's happening in my service layer. That's the middle tier. Then there's the persistence layer or the database layer where you're storing it. So I got all this data that you uploaded in the UI. I'm going to go store it in the database so I can look at it later. So typically those were 3 tiers. That's really when the birth of infrastructure as a service came along where, a virtual machine for the UI that's specially built for the UI, a virtual machine for the services layer, a virtual machine running your database. They're all separate, but they talk to each other. Yeah. So that's infrastructure as a service. So along comes microservices, which is a concept of everything that is a unit of work in your logic layer is completely a separate entity. So think about, I talk a lot about single responsibility. So think of an API, like an application programming interface where you say, in our example, we want to do /upload and somebody will send us an Excel document. So somebody could send to our API an Excel document. Now I want my code to be super small, clean, and it does its one thing. And we know through testing that it's doing it well. So we have that, we call that a microservice where it's its own application. Now, the reason we want to do that is if you think about that model of every single service being in one application in our end-tier example, when I want to change something, like think of the most basic thing in the world, I want to change, for the reason I have in my UI, I have the year hard coded at the top where it says, welcome to 2020 version of my program. I want to change it to 2021. Well, I have to go through and I have to change that piece of code, rebuild the entire application, and then deploy it. Well, the problem is, logically, I could have broken any number of different things because everything in that one application is dependent on everything else in that one application. So, all of us in technology have been in that situation with the all day, all night deployment where it's okay, everybody, we're going to do the deployment now. We're going to turn off one server. We're going to put the new version on there. Everybody's going to go test it. And that's because you have this entire huge application that affects, everything affects itself. And another problem you run into a lot with an end-tier system is the ability to scale. So let's say I have a lot of processing and my middle tier's VM is just overloaded. Well, the only thing I can do is buy another VM. And that's expensive in the cloud world to buy more infrastructure. So now all of a sudden I'm running 2 VMs. And what happens when Christmas comes and it's Black Friday? I need 3 VMs. But then spring comes, I don't need 3 anymore. What do I have to do? I have to turn one of them off. Now I'm still paying for 3. So that's where we get into a little bit of pain. And so microservices are the idea of taking a unit of work that has a single responsibility to do something and building it into its own application in isolation. So what we're saying is /upload. Now, the brilliant thing here is there's this concept that I'm not excited about that it's called function as a service. So, you're not paying for a VM because you're just paying for the work that you do. So what happens is there's something called Kubernetes, which is the management of containers. So we have the ability through containerization where that one API call is inside a little container only the code it needs to run is in that container, and it's sitting there waiting. So somebody makes an API call, and our cloud provider, or in this case, the Kubernetes application, can say, I need to manage. I know in my queue, I have 1,000 documents waiting. I'm going to need to make 10 of those exact same containers for upload, and they can run in parallel. And so I can have flexible architecture that says, okay, I need 10 right now. I'm only going to pay for the 10 that I use for that time period. Then it can get even more granular in what I call, it's function as a service, where they have lambdas in AWS and they call them functions in Azure, where the actual cloud provider will manage that process. So you make that API call, it instantly creates the container. As soon as that API call is done, it tears it down. And so it's just, you pay for what you use. It's a lot cheaper. And when I make that one change to that one service, I just deploy that one service. I just have to test that one service. I just have to guarantee it works perfectly. And I'm good. And microservices are brilliant because it gives us that ability to be so granular and control. There are some disadvantages. Think about thousands or tens of thousands of different applications being deployed. You have to be very automated in how you do that and have a very smart DevOps stack. You have to be very smart about how you test. So there's some caveats there, but it's just, it leads to you can do deployments every day, every hour.
Containers should mitigate some of that risk, though.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, especially functions it's brilliant. I love lambdas. That's definitely one of my favorite things about our stack.